subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In this edition of Global Print, I will take you to Nepal and tell you a little bit about the visit last week of the head of India's external intelligence agency, the RNAW, the Research and Analysis Wing. But before that, dear viewer, I would like to make an appeal to you. Please do subscribe to The Print. You know that we are not behind a paywall. You know that we bring you stories from across the country, from Guwahati to Bangalore, from Kolkata to Hyderabad. And to enable us to continue to bring you these stories, to give you the best videos and tech stories, The Print is perhaps India's only truly multimedia platform. So please do help us, do support us. The subscription links are there in the description of this video, both for domestic audiences and abroad. And I can assure you that we will bring you the best stories and the best videos. So back to Nepal. Last week, Samant Goel, the head of India's external intelligence agency, the RNAW, was in Nepal on a fleeting visit. He arrived there one morning on a special aircraft, met Prime Minister Oli, the Nepalese Prime Minister, as well as the opposition leader, the avowed communist leader, Baburam Bhattarai, and soon was on his way back to Delhi. But what was interesting about Samant Goel's visit was that it was so much in the public eye. Now, you know, dear viewer, that the 2+2 dialogue is taking place in Delhi even as we speak, which means that America's foreign and defense ministers, that's Mike Pompeo and Mark Esper, are meeting India's external affairs minister, S. Jaishankar, and defense minister, Rajnath Singh. So you might wonder, why is it when the whole world, or at least half of India, is talking about the 2+2 dialogue, why am I talking about Nepal? Well, first of all, as you can well imagine and would understand, is that India's neighbourhood is of the utmost priority to India. In many ways, it's not India's foreign policy because it impacts very deeply also in India's domestic policy. For example, we have elections going on in Bihar right now, and Bihar and Nepal share a long common border, as do Uttar Pradesh and Uttarakhand. So this roti beti ka rishta that we often talk about between India and Nepal is primarily this Hindi heartland relationship between, say, Bihar and UP and the Nepalese Terai, the Madhesis who live along the India-Nepal very open border, 1,800 long kilometers. Now, the visit of Samant Goel to Nepal last week has been a very interesting one because India and Nepal have had quite a bitter relationship these last few weeks over Nepal's insistence on expanding its boundaries, on redrawing its map and incorporating Indian territory, which is, by the way, completely illegal internationally because Nepal just can't wake up one morning and say, hey, I want so-and-so part of India, even if though they believe that they want it. So there was no conversation with India, nothing at all. Now, that led to a fracas, as you can imagine, between India and Nepal. The Indian Army Chief, General Naravane, made some comments, some undiplomatic comments, may I add, saying that Nepal was doing this at the insistence of its big neighbor in the north, China, and China and India right now have a bitter relationship. So it was announced also on the eve of Samant Goel's visit that the Army Chief, General Naravane, would be paying a visit to Nepal very soon. This visit is happening on the 3rd of November. And let me remind you that the Indian and Nepalese armies share a very close bond. That in fact, the Indian Army Chief is an honorary general of the Nepalese army and vice versa. The Nepalese Army Chief is an honorary general of the Indian Army. So this brotherly bond, as you can imagine, is a very close one, not just between the armies, but between the two peoples of India and Nepal. So now Nepal is making a gesture, inviting the Indian Army Chief, saying that, listen, let's perhaps saying or indicating or sending a message to Delhi, let bygones be bygones, and let's start a whole new chapter. So then, what was the need for Samant Goel to visit Nepal in this very hush-hush manner? Actually, let me say here that it wasn't so hush-hush, because the because Mr. Goel took a special aircraft. He landed in Tribhuvan airport, which is Kathmandu's airport, in broad daylight. Everybody got to know the leak, if you like, happened in the Nepalese media. But I think actually that India wanted this story to be leaked in the Nepalese media, which would be picked up also by the Indian media and others. So why do you think that the Indians or the Indian establishment wanted this story leaked? My analysis is that India is not very happy, as you can imagine, as I've just told you, with Prime Minister KP Oli, not just because of the map row between the two countries, but let me take you a little bit back into history. In 2017, when Prime Minister Oli comes to power on the back of an election, which he wins on a very, very aggressive anti-India platform. And on the eve of that, if you remember, 2015, when there is an informal blockade all along the Nepalese border, which was informally supported by India. So the blockade was ostensibly carried out by the Madhesi parties because they were upset with the Nepali political elite because they did not want to give the Madhesis equal representation in a new constitution that is being framed or that has been framed in Nepal. So India is supporting the Madhesis behind the curtains. An informal blockade takes place, which makes essential goods very difficult to cross over into Nepal. Now, as a result of that, that leads to a great deal of resentment, especially in Kathmandu, in the Nepali elite, as well as in the hill parts of Nepal. And KP Oli leverages that resentment to come back to power on a resounding anti-India platform. So relations between the two countries were not very good for some time. And at the time, today's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who was Foreign Secretary at the time, you remember he was a diplomat before he retired and then joined the BJP under the aegis of Prime Minister Modi and then becomes External Affairs Minister only last year. At the time, he was Foreign Secretary. So in 2015, Mr. Jaishankar goes to Nepal to try and persuade the Nepalis, including then President Ram Baran Yadav, who is a very pro-India hand, to tell them that, look, the constitution is not very egalitarian and that you should roll it back. But the Nepali elite refuses to listen to him. So already there is a bit of unpleasantness, if you like, or, the vibes are not good at all between Delhi and Kathmandu. So from 2017, we fast forward to this political row on the map between India and Nepal, to give you this fair idea how things have been much more than uncertain. And then we have last week the visit of Samant Goel to Nepal, an unusual person to send to Nepal to mend fences. I agree with you, because usually you would send a political player, not somebody who's an intelligence official, even if he's a very senior one. Now, what is the messages that Mr. Goel was carrying? The first, I believe, is that the first message, I believe, is to Prime Minister Oli, where he says that India and Nepal have a very, very close relationship, right from time immemorial, an open border. Nepalis are allowed to come and work in India, with no problem, no visas. So, therefore, if Nepal is being wooed by the Chinese establishment, and we have seen how in the last few months, the Chinese ambassador to Nepal, Madame Hu Yanqi, has been wowing the Nepalis. She has performed in some dances as well, and has just doing a very, very good job from her point of view as the ambassador of her country. Now, obviously, India has been left flat-footed in Nepal. So Samant Goel sending the message or bringing the message to Prime Minister Oli that even though you may be wowed by the Chinese government, which is promising you all kinds of goodies in terms of an economic partnership, remember that India is your biggest neighbor down south. We have a special relationship, and we are not going to forget that, and we are not going to really let that happen. The second message is another more subtle one to Prime Minister Oli, where he meets Baburam Bhattarai, which is the communist leader I just told you about. Now, Baburam Bhattarai, who is in the opposition right now, if you go again back into history a little bit, Mr. Bhattarai was a student in JNU in the 1970s, so he knows Delhi very well. He knows a lot of people in the Indian political establishment, including, of course, in the left parties. Mr. Sitaram Yechury, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, is a good friend, as are several people in the Congress Party, in the Janata Dal United, and certainly in the BJP. So Mr. Goel meeting Baburam Bhattarai and that message going to Prime Minister Oli that we have close relations, India has close relations across the Nepali political spectrum. Also, Baburam Bhattarai in 2006, before the Jan Andolan, which overthrew the Nepalese monarchy, enabling Nepal to become a republic, for a couple of years before that, lived in Delhi incognito, obviously supported by the Indian establishment. So the second message Prime Minister Oli receives from the Samant Goel meeting with Baburam Bhattarai is that there are several cards on the table. And I would also add that there is a third message. This message is to India's own domestic foreign policy establishment, which is that the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval's firm grip on the neighbourhood is being reaffirmed by sending his man to Kathmandu. Now, you would imagine that this would be the brief of the Ministry of External Affairs, but it seems as if Mr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, has been hugely occupied by the China crisis. On the one hand, we know that the Chinese have aggressed into India, into Ladakh, for the last 6 months or so. And also, Mr. Jaishankar has been quite focused on the US-India relationship. Now, the Americans being the most powerful country in the world so far, naturally, Mr. Jaishankar would like America's help to be able to take on the Chinese. And we saw that in the Quad grouping a couple of weeks ago that was formed between the US, Japan, Australia, and India. Now, where does that leave India's neighborhood? It means that for a long time, India's neighborhood has been left to its own devices. So countries like Nepal, very, very complex and multi-layered, which for the moment Indian diplomats seem to have ignored in favor of other more important relationships that have come up, and which the National Security Advisor's Office, the Secretariat and the NSA himself, seems to have leveraged right now, asserting himself, telling his foreign policy establishment that India cannot afford to ignore its neighborhood. So the visit of Samant Goel, all important, very much in the public eye. I believe that this leak was deliberate to the Nepali media, and which then therefore carried the stories that we all carried, but sending the message to Prime Minister Oli that India has not forgotten, that India will not forget this important relationship, but then too can also play the game. Now, it seems that after the Army Chief's visit to Nepal on November 3rd, the two foreign secretaries of India and Nepal will also meet. This has been in the pipeline for months and months from before COVID, but the Indian Foreign Secretary has been hesitant in meeting his Nepali counterpart. So hopefully that meeting will now take place. The Army Chief will go. And interestingly, the Samant Goel visit, let's see how that plays out. Is Prime Minister Oli going to understand the message that India is sending him via Samant Goel? If he does, then I think this is a whole new chapter in the India-Nepal relationship. If he doesn't, well, then we will see what happens next. This is Jyoti Malhotra with Global Print. Please do read my column in the Print website. And dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.